On my 85th birthday, I sat at the kitchen table with a small cake in front of me and a phone in my hand that never rang. I kept looking at that screen like it might suddenly come alive, like one of my children might finally call and say, "Father, we haven't forgotten you." But the hours passed. Then the evening came. Then the candles melted into the plate, and still nothing. That silence hurt more than any argument ever could. For years, I told myself the distance was temporary. I told myself they were busy. I told myself life was moving fast, and one day they would come back with warm smiles and open arms. But birthdays have a way of telling the truth. Silence has a way of revealing what words try to hide. I did not understand it at first. I only felt the pain. I felt the shame. I felt the strange emptiness of a man who had spent his whole life believing family was forever. But what happened after that birthday changed me in a way I never expected. Because being forgotten by the people I loved most forced me to discover something I had never learned before. A life can break and still not be over. And sometimes when the people you expected to carry your heart walk away, that pain becomes the very thing that teaches you how to rebuild it. What I learned next surprised me. It changed how I saw my children, how I saw myself, and how I saw the rest of my days. And if you have ever felt forgotten, you may understand why this story matters. Number 1, the slow distance that no one talks about. People think family falls apart because of one big fight. They imagine shouting betrayal or some terrible moment that ends everything at once. But in my life, it was never like that. My children did not leave me in one day. They drifted, slowly, quietly. So quietly that I almost did not notice until the house became too silent to ignore. When they were young, our home was full of life. I remember small shoes by the door, laughter in the hallway, and little hands reaching for mine. On holidays, the table was crowded, the room was noisy. Someone was always asking for more rice, more tea, more stories. My children used to run into the house like it was the safest place in the world. Back then, I thought those days would last forever. But life changes in small steps. First, the visits became shorter. Then they became less frequent. Then they started arriving only when there was a reason, an occasion, a favor, a duty, a busy schedule, a quick lunch, a phone call that lasted too little. I told myself not to be foolish. I told myself this was normal. Children grow up, they marry, they build new homes, they carry their own burdens. A father should not expect the world to stay the same. I believed that. Still, there was a moment when I felt the truth. It was not dramatic. That is what made it painful. It was just a week passing without a call. Then 2 weeks. Then a month. I looked at my calendar and realized I had not heard my youngest son's voice in so long I had forgotten the sound of his laugh. That was the real wound. Not hatred, not anger, just silence. And silence can be heavier than an argument. The lesson I learned from that slow distance is simple but hard. Family does not usually break in one night. It breaks through neglect, through routines, through the quiet habit of assuming tomorrow will always be there. I wish I had understood that sooner. I wish I had spoken sooner. I wish I had asked more honest questions before the distance became normal. Because sometimes by the time you finally admit someone is gone, they have already been gone for a long time. Number 2, the loneliest day that changed everything. There is a kind of loneliness that does not arrive all at once. It sits beside you for a while. It waits. It watches. And then one day, it speaks loudly enough that you cannot pretend anymore. For me, that day was my birthday. I had not planned much. At 85, I did not expect a big celebration. I only hoped for a simple call, Maybe a visit, maybe one of those short moments that remind an old man that he still matters. I dressed nicely that morning. I even cleaned the house myself. I fixed a small meal. I placed the cake on the table as if the sight of it might invite joy into the room. I checked the phone again and again. Nothing. By noon, I started making excuses for them. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. Maybe work was difficult. Maybe the grandchildren were sick. By afternoon, I stopped making excuses and started feeling something much harder to name. It was not just sadness. It was the shame of hoping. It was the ache of realizing I had built the whole day around a silence that would never answer me back. I sat near the window and watched the light fade. I remember thinking, did I matter so little that even today they could not find a minute for me? That thought cut deeply. It made me question everything. Was I a bad father? Did I love too much? Did I expect too much? Did I become the kind of man people remember only when they need something? There are questions that do not bring comfort. They only reveal the size of the wound. That birthday did something painful but important. It stripped away my denial. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. I could no longer say they are just busy and mean it with a straight face. The truth was standing in the room with me, and it was hard to look at. The lesson from that day was this: loneliness can either destroy you slowly, or it can force you to face a truth you have avoided for years. That birthday did both. It broke something in me, but it also opened my eyes. And once I saw the truth clearly, I had to decide whether I would remain a wounded man waiting by the phone, or become someone brave enough to build a life that did not depend on being chosen. Number 3, the hard truth I had to accept. The hardest truth was not that my children were distant. The hardest truth was that I could not control it. That realization came to me one quiet night. I was sitting in the dark with only a lamp beside me, thinking about the past. My mind kept moving backward through the years. I remembered the sacrifices, the long work days, the meals I paid for, the shoes I bought, the school fees I struggled to manage. I remembered trying to be a strong father. I remembered believing that love, if given enough times, would always return in the same shape. But life does not always work like that. I asked myself whether I had made mistakes. Of course I had. Every father does. There were times I was too strict. There were times I was too tired to listen well. There were times I thought providing food and shelter was enough, when maybe what they needed more was my attention, my patience, my softness. That reflection hurt, but I needed it. At the same time, I had to be honest about another truth. Children become adults, and adults make their own choices. They carry their own wounds, their own responsibilities, their own distractions. Sometimes they do not understand how deeply their absence affects an aging parent. Sometimes they do. Either way, I could not force love. I could not demand closeness. I could not control their hearts. That was a bitter lesson, but also a freeing one. Because once I stopped trying to control what they felt, I began to understand what I could control. My own days, my own habits, my own response to pain. I could stay angry, or I could stay alive. I could wait in sadness, or I could choose peace. The lesson I learned is one many of us resist. Peace begins when we stop trying to force others to give us what they are unwilling or unable to give. Then we turn inward and ask, how do I want to live the rest of my life? That question changed everything for me. I did not stop loving my children. I never could. But I stopped letting their distance define my whole existence. And that was the beginning of my rebuilding. Number 4, the unexpected way I rebuilt my life. When people hear that an 85-year-old man rebuilt his life, they imagine something dramatic. They picture a grand event, a sudden miracle, or a big change that solves everything at once. My rebuilding was not like that. It was quieter. It began with one decision. I would not sit in the house waiting for life to come to me anymore. The first thing I changed was my routine. I woke up earlier. I took better care of myself. I cleaned the front steps. I walked outside even when I did not feel like it. I started greeting neighbors instead of hiding behind my door. At first, those small talks felt strange. Then they started to feel human again. One neighbor invited me to sit with him in the afternoon. Another asked for help reading a letter. A woman from the community center told me they needed volunteers for a small local program. I did not think of myself as useful anymore, but I went anyway. That was the beginning. I also returned to old passions I had buried long ago. I began reading again. I listened to music I had loved in my youth. I fixed small things around the house. I cooked meals that reminded me of better days. Little by little, I stopped living as a man waiting for his children's attention and started living as a man still capable of joy. And something surprising happened. The emptiness did not disappear overnight, but it became smaller when my life became fuller. I found friendship in unexpected places. I found purpose in simple service. I found that being needed by others, even in small ways, had a healing power I had forgotten. The lesson was clear. Life does not end when people leave. Sometimes that is when a new life begins. I had spent too long believing my story was over because one chapter had become painful. But rebuilding showed me that meaning can return in ordinary ways. A daily walk, a shared cup of tea, a kind word, a useful task, a reason to get dressed in the morning. I was not becoming young again. I was becoming whole again. And that change made me ready for the moment I never expected. Number 5, the day my children finally came back. After I rebuilt my life, I stopped waiting for my children to rescue me from loneliness. I no longer measured the worth of my day by whether the phone rang. I had peace now, not because the pain was gone, but because my heart had stopped depending on what I could not control. Then, one afternoon, the unexpected happened. My eldest daughter called. Her voice sounded hesitant at first, almost careful, like someone stepping into a room she had not entered in a long time. She said she wanted to visit. She said she had been thinking about me. A few days later, one of my sons came by too. Not all at once, not like a storybook ending. But one by one they returned. When they walked into my home, I expected the old ache to rise immediately. But something was different. I was different. I was glad to see them, but I was not desperate. I welcomed them, but I did not collapse into need. I listened more than I spoke. I let the silence be gentle instead of heavy. That changed everything, because when they saw me, they did not find the same broken man waiting by the phone. They found someone who had built a life without resentment, someone who had learned to stand again, someone who did not need their attention to survive. And I think that changed how they saw me too. We talked honestly that day. Not every wound was healed. Not every regret vanished. But the conversation was real, and real conversations can begin repair. The lesson I learned is this: relationships often become healthier when they are no longer built on need alone. When a person rebuilds their own life, love has a chance to return with more respect, more honesty, and less fear. I do not claim everything became perfect. Life rarely works that way. But I can say this: the day my children came back, I was no longer waiting to be saved. I was already living. And that made all the difference. At 85, I learned something I wish I had understood much earlier. Being forgotten can become a terrible pain, but it can also become an unexpected teacher. For a long time, I believed my children's distance meant my life had become smaller. I believed their silence was proof that my years, my sacrifices, and my love had been overlooked, and in some ways that hurt was real. I will not pretend it did not break my heart. But looking back now, I can see that the pain pushed me toward a life I might never have chosen on my own. It forced me to stop waiting. It forced me to look honestly at myself. It forced me to build a routine, a purpose, and a peace that did not depend on another person's schedule. That is why I now speak to older adults who may feel abandoned, ignored, or forgotten. Please hear me clearly. Your life is not over because someone stopped calling. Your value is not reduced because someone became careless with your love. And your days still matter, even when the room feels empty. Do not let silence convince you that you have no purpose left. Go outside, speak to someone, join something, help where you can. Read, walk, pray, create, listen, remember, build again, even if you must start small. A rebuilt life does not always begin with a grand moment. Sometimes it begins with one decision not to surrender to loneliness. I am 85 now, and I can tell you this with a calm heart. The greatest healing did not come when my children returned. It came when I learned to live fully, even while they were gone. And maybe that is the deepest lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful way to heal a broken heart is not to wait for the pain to disappear. It is to keep living.